It's interesting. I've definitely switched to bigger pieces. You know, when this started unraveling, I thought, oh, this is a great time to experiment and learn new things. And then I realized that that wasn't actually what I needed to do. What I needed to do was get larger, long-term projects showing my very best skills and kind of have a long-term relationship rather than a bunch of one-night stands. Like, this is the time to invest in some major pieces.
Let's see if we got Jill. I can see you nicely. I see a beautiful painting that's coming my way, I think.
Oh, look at that.
It's coming my way. Yeah, that thing's fantastic. My God. Wow. We'll have to
It's got certainly another full week's worth of work on it. So
yeah.
But the frame order's underway, so it's exciting.
So I have Jill Carver on, who's dressed up for this, I can tell you.
I put a scarf on.
That's a dress up. That's a dress. You know, I'm not dressed. Well, I've got my bracelets on, so I guess I'm dressed.
You're colorful. Very colorful.
And I've got my mask very close by. God, it's so nice to take the mask off. You know what? I think I just want to only do Zooms from now on. It's, you know.
Isn't it great?
Yeah, I mean, you're here.
Right.
You got clearly a good camera and setup.
Yeah.
And, you know, you didn't have to drive to Tucson. You don't have to sit in my office with a piece of plexiglass between us. And
my husband's getting ready to do some online teaching. I mean, obviously we're here in the mountains in Colorado, but he's setting up for a spring semester Zoom class.
Yeah.
And I mean, how about that? You know, you can teach in Texas in the morning in March and then go cross-country skiing in the mountains in the afternoon.
And this, and you're in a little teeny place too, right? The town you live in is like super small.
It's, yeah, someone said to me recently, why so many people? And we peak at about 240, 50 around July 4th. And then it goes down to about 150 in the winter.
I actually know somebody who lives there, believe it or not.
Who?
Jim Barron. You ever heard of Jim?
I know Jim.
Yeah. I've known Jim for 25, no, longer, 30 years.
Okay. Got two reasons to visit now then.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Jim's invited me many years. So I have two reasons. First one being you, of course. By the way, we have Jill Carver on today. We already started, Jill. So this is how my podcast goes. It's, you know, we just go full front all the way and start. For those people who are only listening to this, I'm going to highly recommend that you go to the YouTube version of this, because you get to see her studio. I get to see all her paint palette with a variety of colors, her brushes, as well as a painting on the easel and a big diptych that is coming to Medicine Man Gallery, more than likely, unless she sells it first. But we will be getting that very probably in a month, maybe.
Yeah. I think it's. I think I spoke to the framer yesterday, and he's reckoning 3 weeks, and I've said as soon as possible. And then this little one on the easel behind me is actually the original little study for New Day.
I wondered if that was New Day. I was gonna ask you. So New Day is this painting that I have in my gallery, which I absolutely love. I really love that painting, by the way. So
Well, you have a challenge, Mark, because my mother also is strongly in love with that piece, and she never responds that emphatically to paintings, but she just fell in love with it. So I said, well, Mark Sublette gets it for a year. And then
right now, I can honestly tell you right now, I hate to break it to your mom.
Right.
It's never coming back.
Right. It's not going to England anytime soon.
Never coming back. She better start looking at the little study on the back of the easel. Right. I'm afraid that's as close as she's going to ever get to that painting. Sorry, Mom.
She took measurements and everything.
So you've got an interesting story, and I haven't heard it all, but I've read some of it. But it's a very interesting story that I want to get into, because clearly anyone who's listening to this can tell that you're not from the United States, that you have an origin that's different, which is England. And so where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in many different places. My father worked for Shell Oil
Hmm.
in Britain.
Hmm.
So we ended up, pretty much moving wherever Shell Oil wanted us to go. So technically I was born in Bedfordshire, north of London, but I was only there till the age of 4. And then we went to the West Midlands and then to Essex. And then I went up to the north of England, to Yorkshire for university and my first job after university. Both grandparents on each side come from London. So I guess in my head, that's what I identify with, is I'm a Londoner. And of course, I ended up living there for the longest stretch of my life. When I worked at the National Portrait Gallery, I was there for 12 years.
You're trying to give me your whole biography in 5 minutes. I'm going to speak out every little piece. Let's just start with your grandparents. They're both sides were Londoners. What did they do?
Well, Second World War, they did whatever was available. My grandfather used to deliver oil around London on a, old cart, and yeah, whatever was available, really.
Did you
Uh,
know them?
I did. I did. I didn't know my grandfather on my mother's side, but I was very close. I did identify with my dad's dad. And in fact, he dabbled and dabbled in painting. And in fact, in the other room, I've got his original little portable oil set and palette. So that's one of my treasured items here.
So did he want to be an artist, your grandfather?
I don't think that it was ever on the horizon, something that he could consider, during that time frame. It was pretty hard scrabble, and both sides were, kind of working class in London and rented homes from the local church and so forth. So I don't even think that was a possibility, but certainly he painted when he had spare time, and when he was retired, he painted.
Mm-hmm.
And then he passed on that that kind of passion to my dad's brother, my uncle. And so definitely that was a real factor and a real inspiration for me growing up, was being around oil paint and smelling oil paint.
And so your dad's brother, was he an artist, an actual artist?
No, he actually did. He died from pancreatic cancer a couple of years ago, sadly, and had emigrated to New Zealand. But he was a very skilled craftsman. So when he lived in southwest England, in Cornwall and Devon, he was a carpenter, a skilled carver and carpenter, and worked on historical homes and so forth down there. And then he painted on the side in his time. And I grew up surrounded by his oil paintings. And when I went to visit him in New Zealand, when I kind of grew up and got mature and was talking to him about his past and his artistic past, he just couldn't stop laughing, because I had put him on such a pedestal. And I thought these paintings were so magical and so phenomenal. And he said, Jill, I copied every single one from a book. Like, there is zero originality in what I did. So,
what was your take on that when you heard that?
Well, it's funny, and then I asked my dad, where surviving paintings were after he died. And I got hold of some visuals. And, if I was critiquing them now, I think, I'd kind of cringe somewhat looking at them. But when I was a kid, I just thought they were, sublime. I thought they were the best of the best.
Well, they were original oil paintings that he had made, and you knew the
right.
evidence,
Right, but they were coastal scenes and things, and I thought, because he lived in Cornwall, he painted Cornwall, but they were all copied from books, apparently.
So was your father at all influenced with that creative bug? I mean, he worked for Shell, so he's clearly successful.
He is, he's not painted, but he definitely has that craftsman, the analytical brain combined with visual acuity combined with a craftsman's hand. So he actually does, since he retired from the oil business, he does beautiful wood carving. That's what he got into on retirement. Wood carving and fly tying, both pretty visual and artistic things.
Very much so. I've tied flies. They're hard.
Yeah.
And some people get really into it using lots of, different types of feathers that are rare. And I don't know, did he go over that edge like that with that?
Yeah, he goes to a class in the club. Pre-COVID, he did, and he still does. And so, yeah, very much so. And he makes, we live in the mountains, and he's turned some beautiful walking sticks for us. And so we use, his work all the time, every day.
You go fly fishing, you mean?
Yeah, fly fishing or hiking in the mountains. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so what exactly did your dad do with Shell? What was his job?
He actually pretty much worked everything. I mean, at one point he was head of personnel, head office in London. At another point, when we lived in the West Midlands, he was distribution manager. So, the delivery, bringing in the oil and distributing it out to different terminals and different petrol stations. Petrol, as we call it in England.
We call it petrol where we're from, in Texas and New Mexico. So he must have been driven, right? Because your grandfather really is somewhat poverty stricken, really. I mean, he's delivering oil in a cart, and he struggles. But clearly your father took it to another level. Is that an accurate statement, would you think?
Absolutely, definitely worked extremely hard. I mean, to have had parents that were, I think my dad was the first to have a mortgage on a home in the family, so to go from renting from a church, which is what his parents were doing. My parents grew up being evacuated during the Second World War and grew up, nobody realizes that food rationing lasted for a very, very long time afterwards. So, times were hard. I mean, both houses none of them had running water. I remember that as a kid. They all had outhouses at the bottom of the garden. And my dad definitely worked extremely hard and did very, very well for himself.
And that comes down to you, because when you have a father, and probably your mother has a similar story, who worked so hard, I'm sure it was instilled to you and somehow, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, everyone that knows me say, well, where's the drive, where's the work ethic come from? And I think that's very much there.
And you probably turn off your lights when you leave the studio, right? Because you don't want to waste electricity. That
of course.
Kind of depression era.
You can see the lights aren't on today, so.
I know this feeling exactly. Coming from poor parents who are, depression era babies, I get it. So,
yeah, I mean, they always had great spirits, I mean, they were never, I never remember, growing up, my parents were great and still are, they got tremendous drive, a great sense of fun. When I was growing up young, we used to head up from, southern England and London up to the Highlands of Scotland for 2 weeks every summer, pulling this homemade wooden trailer with all our camping gear in it. And I loved it, absolutely loved it.
Have your parents been to see your home where you are now in Colorado?
Yes. I think they've been to Rico 3 times now.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
And so as a little girl, did you have that sense of wanting to be an artist? Were you drawing and painting and doing different things?
I was definitely drawing right from the get-go, right from when I was a kid. And my mom always tells the story of, we used to have annual school reports, and she was at school, and my art teacher said to her, you need to watch her artistic talent, because she was the first, and apparently I was the first in the class to put fingers on my stick human drawings. So I think that was always there. And you know, we led a very rich, fulfilling life, but simple at home. I mean, kids these days, they go into, you know, sports clubs and they've got events on every evening and all weekend. And we didn't, you know, we went to school, we came home and we entertained ourselves. And that was either, you know, outdoors. We had an allotment for growing vegetables. And I just remember growing up drawing all the time. And I don't think I had this vision of that's who I was until a lot later. It was just something I really, really enjoyed doing. I was very, very shy as a child. All my school reports say I was pretty much mute, you know, wish she would talk more. I found school quite demanding, and so there was a lot of sense of solace in, you know, going to the woods or sitting at home and drawing. And yeah, I think that was the real start. It was what kind of just centered me and made me feel relaxed and focused.
And so did you struggle with the academic part, but excelled in the artist part when you were a kid growing up?
I was smart. I was smart at school. So I exasperated teachers because I achieved high grades, but I would never contribute in class.
Got it. Okay.
So I think I was probably very frustrating to teach.
And did you win any awards from your art when you were a little girl, or in primary, middle school?
It kind of came, yeah, Mark, I remember when I was 17, 18, winning a scholarship that I hadn't even applied for to go to like a week-long summer school with talented artists that had been pulled by their schools. So it's not something I sought out. It's something that my school proposed that I do because I was, you know, standing out in that class and doing, you know, doing things like murals for the school library and so forth.
So did you go to that school? Did you take?
I did. It was very frightening. I felt like everyone was 10 years older than I was, and I was horribly immature and, you know, incompetent on so many levels.
Were they all like 17 and 18-year-olds?
We were all the same age, but I just felt that they were in maturity and life experience, you know, 10 years ahead of me. And they had, you know, they all wanted to be cool artists, and, you know, Salvador Dali was the thing. And I was just, you know, drawing still lives of sunflowers and bunny rabbits at that point, you know.
So did that change you? Did it affect you, seeing different kids doing different things and exposing you to new types of artwork? Absolutely,
yeah. And but I still at that point didn't think that I could make a career of it. It's interesting in England because I stayed on at school and what they call sixth form college to do A-levels till the age of 18 so that I could go to university. If you want to study art at university level, in England, you really should have left school at 16, not 18, and gone to a very specific art college. So I hadn't taken that turn because at no point back then did I think I could make a serious career of it. You know, I'd kind of looked into cartoons and looked into illustration, and I just thought, probably given my background, that I needed to go out and get a sensible job that brought an income, you know. And I was very good at mathematics. I was doing, for my A-levels, I did art, history, mathematics, and economics. And I was probably my strongest subject at school was maths, to be honest. And so I was going to go and be an accountant in the city and earn a ton of money and, you know, do something really sensible.
From your parents that said, this is a very smart way, I like this, you should go down this lane?
Yeah, of course. There was always that sense. I mean, at one point I wasn't even considering university. I just thought I ought to go out and get a job and earn money. And that was, you know, that was the way forward. It was actually the librarian at school, who was my form teacher, that pulled me aside one day, and he wanted a one-on-one consultation, and he said, please don't become an accountant. You're worth so much more. And so my compromise was I didn't want to go back to art and essentially at 18 years old be studying at a college with a bunch of 16-year-olds. You know, I should have taken that that road sooner. So I went, and I thought a nice compromise was which was my second passion, was history. So that was actually my major at university, was doing a British history degree.
And so do you remember the library's guy's name?
Oh, Mr. Polton.
Since Mr. Polton changed your life potentially, right? In a weird way.
Yes.
True? I mean,
yes. And it was him. And then I had a negative reaction with a math teacher of mine, because my math teacher and my art teacher were kind of squabbling with each other on what I should do. And my math teacher said, well, art is easy and maths will intellectually challenge you. And my comeback was that I never felt so alive and engaged as to when I was painting. And so in a way, he changed my life too, because I started to, in my head, push back on that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what can happen in school too. We don't realize how important teachers are to our formation of what we want to do in life.
Right.
I mean, and clearly you had two people that, because of what they said and how they acted, really pushed you along in a road that you might not have gone. You could have been like one of the great accountants, and we lost all this wonderful art and creativity, but
right.
You're really good at spreadsheets.
Right. And my history teacher at school, Mr. Maples, Richard Maples, if he's watching, he's probably not, but I actually got in touch with him 5 years ago, because I realized that both he and my math teacher at school and my art teacher, actually, I didn't like her at school. She was from Glasgow and was this kind of Scottish battle axe that we were all petrified of. And I realized later on, most students only do 3 A-levels at school. That's all you need to qualify for university. I did 4 because, of course, everyone at school was saying, well, you should drop one, and the one you should drop is art, okay? And I was like, well, I can't drop art. I want to do art A-level. And I went to see the headmaster of the school, and it was a pretty substantial sized school. And he said, you have to go down to 3. You cannot do 4, and art has to give way. And it broke my heart. And Joe Parker, who's the head of the art department, I think there were 5 teachers in that art department, she was the head. She came and pulled me out of a class and said, I've just had a meeting with the headmaster. He told me that you can't take A-level art. She said, I am going to teach you in my free periods in my own time and not get paid for it. And that's what she did for 2 years. Wow. And so we actually stayed in touch, and she became a near and dear friend and wrote to me every Christmas. And whenever I came back from north of England to visit my parents, she was only 30 minutes away, and so I would go and visit her. She died about, I'm guessing, about 10 years ago now. But yeah, we became firm and fast friends. And so she was so thrilled I got a job at the National Portrait Gallery of all places. And right. Then when I moved to the States and started working full time, she got to see me succeed. And she was super proud, yeah.
Well, you know what amazes me is that you said that there were 5 art teachers at a high school.
Mm-hmm. It was big. It was a big state school. I mean, yeah. That doesn't happen anymore, right?
No, yeah. I don't know if it does in England. It would be interesting to know that. It sure doesn't happen in the United States. You're lucky if you have an art department at all, if you have any kind
right.
of art. And
yeah.
Were other people that came from your high school, did they become professional artists?
Not that I know of, no.
Just you?
No, yeah.
And so you graduate from high school, and you are going to go into history. And so this is art history, this is English history.
British history, yeah. Right. I went to Sheffield University. I did history at A-level at school, and it was really interesting because we were kind of racing through from, what was that, Henry VII through to James II or something. Mm-hmm. And we left out the English Civil War and the Republic. And because it was too difficult and too complex to compress within a 2-year syllabus. And so it had always intrigued me. The area where I lived, the pub that I used to drink at was built around the Civil War time. It goes back that far, and supposedly some cavalier hid in the fireplace there. So it was always an episode that really fascinated me, the fact that England had had a civil war and a revolution that essentially opened the door to France having its revolution. And so I chose Sheffield University because they kind of specialized in that period and had courses specifically on the Civil War and the Republic and Oliver Cromwell. So I know it sounds so detached, but I think that to me, I mean, it sounds like you've taken this circuitous route too, from being a surgeon to an art dealer, and people think, what? You know, to me, I'm just someone that's very interested in how things fit together and why they are the way they are, whether that's the parliamentary system in England or whether that's how an aspen tree grows. To me, there's still a similarity there in figuring out how things work, how they're put together, and why things are the way they are.
It's called a curious human being. That's what it is.
Right, right.
It is. That's exactly what it is. People
Right.
who are curious, you know, evaluate and look at those, you know, those elements that, you know, may be very disparate in their ways, but if they see commonality, right? I'm sure all your paintings have that same sensibility. If you really go to look at them, you know, it's just not a landscape of the Grand Canyon or Utah or something like that. There's other things for sure. And your titles tell you a lot as well. I think the titles are an insight into the soul of the painting to some extent.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a painter, for me, it's almost a means to an end. You know, you're drawing or you're painting something in order to understand it better. Whether it's a human figure or whether it's a tree or whether it's how a canyon works or, you know, the mesa or volcanic uplifts and so forth. And yeah, to me, painting is a side product of trying to understand that environment and that landscape and how it's all put together, you know. And as much of a kind of prude and cantankerous man John Ruskin was, I mean, he was very much an advocate of getting everybody to draw, even if they weren't talented or they didn't intend to be painters, and just in order to understand something a lot deeper.
That's right. It's the same in medicine, right? So, I mean, you could learn medicine without going to medical school, but you'll never get the deep level of, on a cellular level, on pathological and anatomy level. And so all those little processes that you go through help you when you get to the final end. If you're trying to make a diagnosis, you go, oh, I know the pathology, I understand the anatomy, I understand what's going on here. And I think that's the same as an artist. Drawing, which is seems to be somewhat of a lost art form, really is the basic structure of, you know, understanding composition.
Right, right.
At least it
And
seems like.
painting is a way of understanding a landscape. There is just there's no better way of getting to know a place than to sit still, to be still, and to try and render some of that on a 2D surface.
Yes, I would think that. Of course, I'm not a painter, so I've just said all this stuff, and you know, I live through painter's eyes and
Right.
kind of understand.
Well, I don't go out to, when I say the painting is a side product, when I go outside to paint or to draw whatever, you know, materials I have with me, I don't go out with a view to, I am producing a product, i.e. a painting.
Right.
I go out with the real mindset of, I want to learn about this place. And if a painting pops out as a side product of that process of observation and conversation with a place, then that's great.
Well, that's the same for me in the sense that I don't look at selling a product. I hate that term, in fact, but I look at the moment it took to take that painting. And when I look at a piece, I mean, really look at a piece, not just, and hopefully all dealers do this that really care, is they spend the time, just like you spent the time in front of that area where you painted plein air. I take the time to look at the painting alone and get the sense of what's going on and how you did the colors and the shadowing and why the thing pops for me emotionally as well. And I think it's very important, like the painting we're talking about behind you, you know, that painting popped for me when I saw it just on your Facebook site or Instagram, whichever it was, I don't remember, and immediately hit a chord. And I've sat in front of that painting on more than one occasion, just enjoying it, just as you sat in front of that area, you know, when you first did it. So there is a thread, I think, and it's palpable if you're a serious artist that's trying to make an emotional statement.
Right, right. It's important to me that they feel very personal, and I think if you're doing it right, there's no way that they can't feel personal, and that there's kind of an authenticity there.
Yeah,
that comes with that
yeah.
personal.
Every one of your paintings, you know, I haven't represented you that long yet,
No.
but it will be. We're gonna, you know,
Yeah.
20 years from now, we'll have this conversation. But even in the short couple of years that I've represented you, I feel each painting is very unique. You know, there's something, you know, there's the way you do some of the things that you do in the foreground, which are kind of ephemeral. I can feel that it's different. You know, there's emotion in that painting. And then we're talking about landscape paintings too, which is, you know, when you can bring that to the land, it's a magical thing. And the fact that I'm from the West, I can feel the West in your paintings. I think, and maybe you want to just tell me, because to me, I've always felt for somebody to really paint a subject, they have to be in that area, that they can't just do it from photos. They can't just do it from videos or whatever. They have to be there smelling, looking, seeing, tasting, touching, experiencing that light, color, form, and all that. What do you
Right. It's interesting because, you know, what you're touching upon hits home for me, because I made my name in the United States doing a lot of the plein air events and competitions.
Right.
And it was great because I got to meet friends and other artists and make connections in a new country, which was really vital to me. But the reason I stopped doing them was I pretty much had a panic attack getting out the plane in Baltimore and driving out to Easton, and I didn't know the trees. They were like these huge things, and I panicked because I didn't know what type of trees they were. And as a result, I felt like a total fraud. You know, like, how can I come here for a week and be painting this landscape and not know what I'm looking at? And it was one of those things that actually stopped me from doing those competitions and just, you know, feeling like a member of a SWAT team, you know, getting out of an airplane with my easel and going to grab at least 20 paintings in 5 days. And then I just felt like I started to feel like a fraud. I started to feel like I wanted to put down roots and paint what I know. And at that point, we had gotten at that point, I was based in Austin, Texas, and I just didn't do the heat well. And so we got a little 2-room miners cabin here in Rico, and that was my go-to place. And as soon as it got above 90 degrees, I would take the 2 dogs and run for the hills. And I think I just wanted to be here more and more. And maybe it's because it's forested and green and we get rain, and it feels a little like Scotland, where I was really happy, that it really kind of resonates. And then from here, I don't know why an English girl feels such an affinity for the desert, but I do. And
I can tell you.
You can tell that. I think, yeah.
I can tell you why, because there's something in there that clicks, you know,
Yeah.
and I think everybody has it. I think artists are more in touch with that sensual side, that creative side. And when they feel that click, that, you know, that puzzle coming together, you know, that, you know, you're home. I feel it when I go to Hawaii. I don't know why. When I'm on the Big Island, I feel like I'm there, right? It's meant to be. Same with
Right.
New Mexico, same with Arizona. There's certain places, and for whatever that thing was, it was always there. and it was just a puzzle waiting to be filled. And you were lucky enough to find it, and you probably
Right.
knew it instantaneously. I have a funny feeling.
And I think, where Rico is, it's ideal because I can be in Canyonlands in 3.5 hours.
Hmm.
If I drive, even though we're at 9,000 feet in aspen and spruce forest, if I drive an hour south, I'm in sagebrush country. And so I'm really near the desert. I don't want to live in 100 degrees anymore, but I definitely want to access the desert.
Don't come to Tucson right now. It's 110 today.
I saw those temperatures.
So let me ask you, so we kind of bumped to the forward, but I want to get back to college. So we're going backwards here for
Oh,
a moment. Sorry, I'll put it on. But, so you go to college, you get your degree in history. And so where do you go from there? What do you do with the history degree?
well, I went to Sheffield University, so quite a big city in the north of England, famous for its steel industry and cutlery industry. But it's also adjacent to the Peak District, which was England's first national park. So it's an area I just deeply fell in love with and totally connected with. And I thought, I loved studying British history, particularly 17th century British history, but I loved being in the north of England too, and in that landscape. And it's like every undergraduate at university, you are kind of scrambling, thinking, what's the potential here for a job? And I was applying for different jobs. In my third year at university, I volunteered at Sheffield City Museum, which I loved. I mean, those old original city museums that are free to the public. It's kind of like Victorian eclectic collection. I mean, they have, shrunken heads and I mean, old cars, and it's just across the board. And so I was thinking actually that would be a very nice career place to be, would be in a museum, a city museum or an art gallery. While I was studying British history, I was going out with my tent to the Peak District on the weekends when I didn't have a paper to write, and hiking and painting throughout university. I got offered jobs in museums in Britain are gold. I mean, they're so hard to come by. I got offered to do a maternity cover at Sheffield City Museum. I mean, they knew me, they loved me, they wanted me to work. It was just whether the job would come up. So I could cover this lady that was going to take a very generous 6 months off to have a child. But I had a conversation with her, and she was absolutely determined to come back. So I thought, 6 months. The alternative opportunity that came up, and I can't remember who suggested it. I knew someone in the careers service fairly well because I was itching to get back to my art in some sense. So it was kind of a year off. I went to a Quaker school in York as an artist in residence for a year.
Now, that was a big jump right there for you to do that.
Right, exactly.
What was
to identify myself after 3 years of essentially being an academic in 17th century British history, to then take a whole year that really wasn't an investment in my career future and say, I'm going to go back to my art and just do this for a year. So
why do you think you did that? What was it that made you take that?
It was a teacher, my tutor. It's always the teachers, Mark. They're the greatest. That's why I married one, But it was my university teacher. I went in and I had this conversation with him. I said, look, I can do 6 months maternity cover, and that would probably be a great foundation stepping stone to a career in the museum world, or I can take a year off and go back to my painting. And he looked at me and he said, are you crazy? Go paint for a year.
What great advice.
Yeah.
That was great advice.
Yeah.
And so you went and painted for a year, and this And this was a Quaker school?
Yeah, it's a Quaker boarding school, and in York. So I was given an apartment that looked out over York Minster Cathedral from my kitchen window.
Nice.
And it was in old historic York, goes back 12th century earlier. And the idea was that I would do some teaching. These were 12-year-olds up to 18-year-olds, boys. I would do some teaching, and I had to do a roster in one of the boarding houses. So I had 9 12-year-old boys to look after and make sure they did their chores and ate their supper and got into bed. And
horrible.
I wasn't so crazy about the 15, 16-year-olds. I loved the 12-year-olds and I loved the 18-year-olds. I thought they were phenomenal. But it was a great school, very small, and high quality community and educational experience. So yeah, I had duties, but then the idea was that I would pursue my own artwork, and I was given part of the art classroom to do that, so that particularly the older students could see me develop and see me experiment and do some work. And I did some teaching there too. If a teacher was off sick, I used to jump on in and teach class, and I loved it. And so from there, I was obviously thinking, okay, now what comes next?
Right,
And
I'm a teacher now. Maybe I'm going that route too. Even an
right.
art teacher, maybe, right?
So I was applying for all kinds of, I remember I applied for a job designing whiskey bottle labels and did the worst interview ever. It clearly wasn't meant to be. And then I was reading, at that time, of course, there was no online search mechanism for finding jobs, right? So I'd buy the Guardian newspaper on a Monday, which was the arts and entertainment job section. And I saw that the National Portrait Gallery were advertising for a research assistant in their archive and research rooms. And I thought, well, that would be interesting, because that would combine the art connection with my knowledge of British history, which is very important at the National Portrait Gallery. It's important that you know the historical personalities.
Sure.
And so I applied for that, and I was one of 250 applicants. And I went down on the train from York to London, and I cram read David Piper's The English Face, which is kind of the Bible on British portraiture. So I read that on the journey down, and I just got really lucky, Mark, is all I can say, because I'm sure they had stellar candidates. I think I was 10 were being interviewed, something like that. So they did this postcard test where they showed me 3 postcards and said, if you didn't know who these people were, or if you know who they are, tell us. And how would you go about researching them? What are the clues? How would you embark on the detective work of identifying who they're of and then who they're by? And I just got really lucky. I mean, they showed me one picture, and none of them was 17th century, by the way. I thought that was really unfair. I had 2 18th century and 1 19th century. And it was really unfair, given that I specialized in 17th century. But I think I saw some tartan or something, and I said, oh, Bonnie Prince Charlie. And they went, you're right. So I think I got very lucky.
Well,
But I think actually the key to that was my art background, because there's not many curators or research assistants that actually have practical knowledge of producing something. I think that appealed, and I think the volunteer work at Sheffield City Museum, there's so much donkey work that goes on behind the scenes at museum and art galleries. You really have to be a team player. And yeah, you get to do really exciting research work and detective work, but there's a lot of, really kind of donkey work, filing.
Take the trash out.
Yeah, dry mounting images for the files, taking the trash out, making the tea for the curators.
Yes.
I had already done that all. So I had a very realistic idea of what was going to be involved.
And so you went from a fairly small place to London, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
had to be quite interesting and intimidating. Are you still the quiet child at this point, or as you come out of your quiet?
I think I came out of my shell my third year of my university was when, and again, that comes down to a very good tutor, someone that took a personal interest as well as an academic interest. Um, and so, yeah, that was fascinating. In fact, I've taken it upon myself to track down my teachers and thank them,
Mm,
for being a guiding light
yes.
and for being an influence. And I know from the letters from students that my husband gets that he's done the same for many, many, many different people. So I tracked down my university professor who had moved from Sheffield to Pittsburgh. No, Sheffield, Cambridge University, Pittsburgh University, and then had gone home to New Zealand and University of Auckland. And I had the good fortune of teaching in New Zealand 2 years ago. So I Googled him, I called him up. I said, I don't know if you remember me. And he said, of course I do. Come stay and visit. So I got to drink wine with him and thank him for having pushed me in the right direction too.
He was the one who got you out of your shell.
He was the one that told me to go paint for a year instead of thinking about my long-term career.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Yeah.
It's hard to do though when you're at that age and you come from a history like you do, where you're expected to do well, you're expected to be financially secure, and that's in the back of your head at all times.
Well, I think it wasn't so much expectations. My parents wanted me to be happy. They've always said that, but I just didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be one of those kids that went to university and then ended up back at home. I just thought that was just the most horrifying thought ever, so I definitely wanted to be out there and self-sufficient and not be a burden on them. I mean, they had supported me through university. You get financially assessed and the government says, we'll fund you this much and your parents have to top it up to this much, so yeah, I just didn't want to end up back at home. How humiliating.
I'm not sure any kid does. So when you go to the portrait gallery, so this is a National Portrait Museum in London, how long are you there?
I did, I think it was just under, like a month or two under 12 years.
Wow. So
Yeah.
that's a very long time. So, during that point, are you still painting?
Absolutely. And probably more so, actually, because when I get to London, suddenly the world opens up for me because yes, I have a job Monday to Friday, but London is full of people. So as soon as I was there, I was signing up to do life drawing classes in the evening. And through that, I got to connect with other artists in London. And so on the weekends, we would then, whoever had a car, I didn't get my first car till I was 35, I think. It was always jumping on the train to the coast, but one of us would have a car. And yeah, that was the time. Get out of London for a day on the weekend, go down to Sussex or, the coast and go paint.
Did you know you really should be doing that as a profession at that point? Or were you putting that in your back of your mind? I mean, I would think it had to be there that you wanted to be an artist.
I think it wasn't that I wanted to do it as a profession. I just absolutely knew it had to be a part of my life and a big part of my life, in that whatever else I was doing, whatever else I had to do to earn money or have a job, that was something that I had to do in my spare time. So it's just who I am, and whether I could do that professionally or not, still seemed very doubtful. I'm not sure it was something that I even dreamed of, it was kind of beyond that. It's just something I did because I had to do it. It's who I am,
Yeah, because
like
you're an artist.
like someone that has to run 10 miles every morning. It's just something you have to do before you go off to the office. This is something I have to do, so.
Yeah, well, it's there. You're an artist. That's what you do.
It's how I relate to the world.
Yeah.
And I think because I always had difficulty relating to people without feeling totally drained by doing that, it's just, it's always something I've had to do. It's like a religion, you know?
So what did you do at the portrait gallery? What was your job?
I worked,
That's a
yeah,
long time. 12 years is a long time in a major museum.
right. So I worked in what was called the archival library. It was the research department. I'm not sure if you've watched Philip Mould, the London art dealer. He's got a series on TV. Oh, you would love it. It's so fascinating. But where I used to work is shown a multitude of times in that program, because we had this vast research department with files that went back to the 1870s, building up this kind of essentially a physical database of any portrait of a British person that was ever done, whether it went through the sale room, whether it's mentioned in a book, or illustrated in a book, whether it's mentioned in somebody's diaries. I mean, there were both these visual files and these written files that went, you know, that were essentially exploring every portrait in existence beyond the gallery's collection of portraits. And so essentially I was kind of a research assistant. We had a curator of each century. So we'd have a 16th century curator, an 18th century curator, and so on. And I was kind of the research assistant that would essentially kind of back them all up, like the less important cases. There were two of us doing the job in that department. And so we acted as a research backup from the public. So any member of the public, someone at Christie's or Sotheby's, you know, would write in with photographs of paintings that were either coming up for sales or had appeared in private collections or were found in the chicken coop or whatever, you know, and we would do the research on them. At the same time, we're watching what's going through the sale rooms and adding, a lot of it was information adding to this massive archive record of British portraits.
I find that actually amazingly fascinating. That
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
you know, I didn't even know a job like that really existed.
Right.
You know, and I mean, for Sotheby's and Christie's, it's so wonderful. They get free. I guess it's free that you.
It's considered free because we were the National Portrait Gallery. So the collection is considered public. The gallery was free to the public apart from specific special exhibitions. And what I did and my colleague did was a free service to the public. Now, there was only so much time that we could dedicate, obviously, into researching a portrait. We could only go so far, but then we would hopefully be able to give them a list of avenues that they might then pursue.
And how did
a
you
lot of the time you were letting people down gently. You know, they felt that they had an original Lawrence, right, and you're there to tell them it's an awful 19th century copy or something.
And so how do you do the research? This is pre-Google, I assume, pre-internet?
This is pre-Google. So we had these huge rooms, if you can imagine these huge, that's why I asked you if you'd seen the Philip Mould series, because they're in these archives all the time. So we had files arranged by sitter and then files arranged by artist. And we were British only, but I'm sure you've heard of the Courtauld Institute of Art. They were just down the road, and they had similar visual files arranged by artist, European, American, you know, the whole world of art history, essentially. But we were British portraiture. That's what we studied. So we had visual files, we had written index slips, we had a vast library. So yeah, if you had a clue, or, you know, here's a portrait of Wellington, you know, who's it by? Mm-hmm. You would probably have, oh my gosh, each visual box probably contained, I don't know, 200 images. And you just start sorting through and seeing if you could find an early photograph of the painting, you know, to try and build out its provenance and kind of prove it was genuine.
Well, first you have to even decide if it's British or not, right?
Right.
I mean, be anything.
Right. Well, the sitter had to be British. The artist could be
Yeah, but I mean,
European
you
or
still have,
American.
you have an image and you
Right,
go, okay, here's this old guy,
right.
the beard and the
It's
back.
an old guy with a beard. Yeah,
Well,
you were often telling people, yeah, you got a portrait of an old guy with a beard, and that's probably. So there were all kinds of clues because some portraits would have like a family crest, coat of arms,
hmm,
so you could research it that way. Or they might come in and say, well, I know it used to be in this house. So then we had records and means and ways of finding out, well, what family names were attached to a house name. And
mhm.
then we go to those, those surnames and research those names. We at least would try and date something from costume or from wig style, to at least give someone an idea of what time frame it dated from. And then, I would always encourage people to photograph the backs too, because even canvas makers stamps,
Oh, yeah, it's the most
maker
important.
stamps, we would have visual records of what those rubber stamps would look like belonging to a certain period. So you could help substantiate the date of a piece from looking at the back too.
Well, and you can,
Detective work,
yeah, it
essentially.
is. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, when I look at a painting, I look at the back just as much as I look at the front because it's
Mhm.
going to tell you so much. It's going to
Right.
tell you, are there original stretcher bars or was this hung a different way or a different angle? Is there writing? Are the keys in it? All these things are clues. It's a big clue. And
Right.
sometimes I can learn as much, if not more, from the back of the painting than I can ever from the front.
Right.
And
Yeah. It was
sure.
an interesting time to work there because I remember the first 2 years I was there, when I was writing to a client or an inquirer with a response, it was on a typewriter. Okay. I mean, it's just amazing how quick everything's changed. And then we transferred to, the first computers and printers, to produce letters. But then, the gallery, I think, had something like 10,000 paintings in its what was called the primary collection. But the reference collection, which we also looked after, which was made up of drawings and prints and engravings, we had tens of thousands. So what became a big part of my job was actually cataloging them onto databases when that first became available as a tool.
Yeah, I would think your job is really now could be supplanted by AI. As long as everything is cataloged, then the computer can actually decide who's what and what's who, and it takes a second or millisecond
Right. To a
versus.
certain point, we had all these written index slips, where someone was going through an old book or an old journal or an old inventory from a country house, just writing it down, portrait mentioned of this sitter. And we were wondering whether to do exactly that, to just ultimately get a team of volunteers and upload all those hundreds of thousands of written index slips onto a computer. But we were judging how much would be lost by that because some curators from the past weren't so reliable with their notes, and some opinions you would hold in really high regard. So even something as looking at an index slip might become a key piece of evidence.
Mhm.
And if you were to say, oh, well, actually, I recognize this handwriting as John Ingermell's, therefore it's incredibly trustworthy, that definitely counted for quite a lot, actually. So,
You could put that into it, right? I mean,
right,
you could
right,
still put that into it, and they would go, "Oh, Ingerman, yeah, that's the one." So he's
right.
has high trust
You
versus.
couldn't have a team of volunteers being able to recognize everyone's handwriting. They'd just be translating, they wouldn't have that knowledge. So it's
Well,
a
once it's
balance.
put in, and once they take your knowledge and put it in, it's amazing. It would be very interesting for you to go back at some point and go see what they're doing now. I bet it's.
Right.
I bet
Well,
it's.
from what I've seen, I've been watching this series on the telly, and Philip Mould and his assistants go there all the time to research paintings. And from what I can tell, it's still the physical visual stuff
Or does that,
file,
or
still
does
the
that just
filing
make good?
cabinets, numerous written
Or
notes.
does that just make good TV where they pull it out?
Right.
You know. So what was the most exciting find that you had in that 12-year period? Do you remember one that stuck
I
out?
don't, no, I don't. They were very few and far between. It was
Sure.
probably, once or twice a year. And even then, it probably wasn't someone famous, it was some local MP from 3 generations back or something.
Wow.
So one of the most exciting things for me, I managed some of the photography sessions there. So they trained me up as an art handler.
Mhm.
So if you're thinking about, memories and thrills, certainly being able to handle a Hans Holbein miniature or, the portrait of Elizabeth I. To me, particularly with my love of history, that was a real thrill, that you're sharing the same, here you are sharing the same airspace with this object that Elizabeth I had shared airspace with. And yeah, definitely being able to handle some of those pieces was definitely a thrill.
And somebody may feel the same way about your material someday.
I hope so. Yeah.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
that be something that it goes
Yeah.
the whole
You are getting a piece of someone with a painting,
Absolutely. So you do that for 12 years, and then something happened where you decided it was time, another teacher, to move to another plane. What happened that made you leave?
Yeah, no, Texas was never on my list of things to do.
Nobody's so things to do.
Right. So no, when I was at the National Portrait Gallery, one of the researchers coming in every year or so was this guy from Colorado that taught at the University of Texas, interested in portraits of the Earl of Rochester, who was a poet at Charles II's court. And I was helping him with his research. And we got chatting about a contemporary painter that had just died called Felix Topolsky. And I said, well, Felix has a son still in London. He was the great Oxford rowing coach, Daniel Topolsky. And Larry was like, what? And I said, yeah, and I know him. And every Friday night they have a party in Felix's studio underneath the arches, underneath Waterloo railroad lines, let's go. And so, yeah, we struck up a relationship, a friendship really, and a correspondence that lasted 3-4 years. And then we started long distance dating. And hence I ended up in Austin, Texas.
A man.
A man, yes.
So you went to Texas because you fell in love with this individual.
Right.
And what did you expect to do in Texas?
Well, that's where it gets really funny because I was really focused on the transition and in terms of leaving England more than anything. And I just assumed that I would carry on curatorial research work in Texas. And it turns out that there isn't much call for knowledge of 18th century British portraiture in Central Texas. So about a year into my experience there, where I hadn't been hired by anybody to do research into 18th century portraits, I was kind of floundering, Mark, to be honest. And everyone says, you have to be able to pivot during times of crises. And I thought, well, I either head back to England and call it quits, or, what can I do? And my husband, who had actually purchased some of my paintings when we were just correspondents in London and America, said, I will support you for 3 years. Why don't you do painting professionally? And I have to say, I was very, very hesitant because, to take something that's your solace and your go-to and to turn it into a profession, it's like, the analogy of someone having to run 10 miles every morning and then suddenly say, well, you're going to be shooting to be on the Olympic team and that's your goal. Right. It was something I was very nervous about doing, but he said he would financially support me for 3 years. And so I started painting, and I found Texas really, really hard to paint, I have to say, because none of the English colors that I was carrying around with me applied to Texas at all. My burnt umbers and my Payne's grays and my sap greens.
And this was
it
in
didn't
Austin?
work.
This was
And so
Austin
this
too?
was in Austin, yeah.
And yeah, and
So
the light's different too. Everything's
the
different.
light is totally different. You know, you don't get that humidity and that soft light that you get in England that you kind of take for granted. So that put me on a really steep learning curve, which I think was a really good thing because it hit home how little I knew. And the lack of an art education became very apparent at that point when you changed the environment. And so I knew I had to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch and get caught up on my art education, you know, learning color theory, learning to start with a primary color palette, and red, blue, and yellow was where I started. So I started painting, and I started doing the Austin Fine Arts Fair every year. So, and I did very well at it. You know, I'd spend a year going out into the Texas Hill Country and the Big Bend National Park, and I would, you know, gather this group of work together, and then every summer I would do the Austin Fine Arts Fair and sell very well. And I still have some clients that purchased their first Jill Carver under a tent, you know, my 10 by 10 booth and my tent that I'd set up all by myself selling these paintings. Some of them are still on board, and that's great. But I did that for several years, and then a very good gallery in Austin, the Wally Workman Gallery, approached me and said, we'd like to have your work in the gallery. And my response is always, I'm not ready yet, I'm not ready yet. So she came back the year later and visited me in my tent and said, you still haven't called me. And I said, I'm ready now, you know, so.
And so were you doing blue bonnets and that kind of thing as well?
I have never painted blue bonnets, Mark. Still a blue bonnet virgin. That's one thing I refuse to do.
And is that because it's so classic Onderdonk kind of a thing that it's, or is it because you don't like blue bonnets, or is it because you don't like purple, or why don't, tell me why you won't paint
I think
a
blue bonnets are very pretty, but I think Texas Hill Country has a lot more to offer, and they're only out for a few weeks of the year, and most of them grow along the highway verges because Lady Bird Johnson had this seed planting project going on down there. So, you know, I like painting what I know and what I see, and it's like, you know, it goes back to our earlier conversation. It's a way of getting to know a place. So in all honesty, I just wasn't finding many blue bonnets. It felt somewhat that, you know, Texas is so caught up anyway with this kind of idea of itself, you know, the myth of Texas, that I was constantly having this conversation with myself. Do I want to seek out the mythical Texas, or do I want to paint my experience of Texas? And I chose the latter route because I felt that was more important to me and my sanity. Most bluebonnet paintings are composites anyway.
Yes.
You know, they're not real places. So I never went down that road, and I'm so grateful. And I painted places that people know but haven't been painted before.
So I take it there's no Alamo paintings either.
No.
You were painting landscapes though in Texas, I see.
Correct. Yeah, and there's some beautiful state parks. You know, Pedernales State Park and Big Bend National Park.
Yeah, that's
is
fantastic.
still a place to go paint.
Yeah. That's
Matt Smith described the Big Bend National Park as the desert without any plants in it.
Kind of is true, really. Yeah, Matt's pretty smart about those kind of things. And so when you're doing this, what years are this when you started to be a painter? What would this have been in Texas? What year?
Well, I moved to the States, it would have been 2002.
2002.
Yeah. No, maybe 2000. No, I think 2002, 2001 or two. I think it was two. Yeah.
And so from that point on, would you consider yourself, okay, I'm a fine art painter from about that point?
I had always considered myself a painter, but suddenly the pressure was on to be a professional painter and actually make an income from it. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's,
but I would have been a lot richer quicker if I'd done bluebonnet paintings.
There's still chance. I'm going to try to get a commission right now. That's going to be my goal of blue bonnets. And that may happen. I may have to make that happen. Um, then we have to find an actual place that has true bluebonnets that you can
Yeah,
go and
right.
experience it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how long did you stay in Austin then?
So, well, I guess I've been based out of there business-wise from 2002 up to 3, 4 years ago. But in 2008, we bought the first cabin here in Rico. So I was doing 6 months and 6 months. And then my husband was coming up to join me as and when he could.
And he teaches, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you buy those cabins and then 2009 happens. And
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. No, we lost money on the cabin, but we, my husband, I don't think it was ever on the cards that we would be here full time, but that has happened and we love it and we adore it. And right now we are so grateful to be here because it's, we can just walk out the door into National Forest, it's a good place to be right now.
yeah, your COVID levels are very low down there, up there.
Right. But we upgraded to a house. And so even though we lost money on the original cabin, we got a steal on a really nice house, which is where we are now. So.
And so right now as an artist, where do you sit kind of now? And one of the questions actually I do have, because I like to ask this to, I think, all my women artists is, did you find discrimination being a woman in the world of painting?
I am going to have to say yes, but I think I've also benefited from it, Mark, because there are fewer women functioning at this level. So when a show is looking for a female artist or someone's looking for a female judge, I'm more upfront and on the radar because there's fewer of us. There's still discrimination across the board in every walk of life. It's not equal yet by any means. And my go-to example there is as a compliment, and it's happened more than once, I've been told, "Oh, you're good, you paint like a guy."
Oh my God.
And my turnaround on that is, has it ever been said as a compliment, right? Because you take the intent
Right.
with what it's made, and it's a compliment, so you have to be grateful for that. But has it ever been said to a guy painter as a compliment, "You're great, you paint like a girl"? Never, never. So
it's so funny when I look at art, I could care less.
right.
I just could care less. It's the last
Right.
thing I would even consider. It's just
Yeah.
all about the art.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
do see those kind of things, that there's still prejudice, to women artists. That's why I ask. And it's
I
something.
just think, just in general, I think you have to work a little bit harder, be a little bit more articulate, and a little bit more convincing that you're passionate about your craft and that you are academically intelligent. And I have stayed away from female-only art groups and shows thus far, just because I didn't want to identify as a woman painter. I wanted to just be a painter.
I get that. I totally get that.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I look at you as as a painter. I wouldn't have known if Jill was a boy or a man. And when I first saw your art, I didn't care. In fact, Francis Livingston, I thought he was a woman.
Right.
When I called him to say, I want to represent you, I thought it was a her, because I didn't know anything about, the artist. I just could tell that that individual had great chops. And kind of how it always should be. Maybe it's like The Voice, where you can't see the person.
But it falls into that, that more general widespread expectation that, women with opinions are not particularly attractive to be around. And it's so wrong, that we're expected to be gentle and sweet and kind.
Yeah, well, I couldn't imagine that at all. I mean, I want my significant other to be
Sure.
you know, right there with me, if not ahead of me and everything. And pretty much she is. So,
Right.
you know, it's true. I ask her opinion on everything, right?
Yeah.
She has her view and can see things differently.
Right. But
So
that's my gauge. When is it going to be said as a compliment to a guy painter? You're great. You paint like a girl.
I'm going to say that.
We're not there yet.
I'm actually going to say that to somebody.
Oh, good.
I am going to say that to an artist, a male artist. I'm going to see what they say. I'm going to see
Mm-hmm.
their reaction, and I'll tell you exactly what it was.
Right.
Yeah. I'll try to find one that I know it'll really get them and see what the response is. That's very interesting. Well, I
Yeah.
see that,
I
you know.
think the fact that I knew um, single malt whiskeys and could handle my whiskey has opened a lot of doors within the more male circles in the art world. I've drunk quite a few famous male painters under the table, and I'm proud of it. I don't drink whiskey anymore, but you know.
Well, you even tried to get a job painting it, right? Working there as a job early on. Now we know. So where are you now in your career? Where are we at this point? I know you're very busy. And you know, it seems as if you're a moderately slow painter. I don't put that as a down thing. I put that as actually a good thing, that it's very hard to get your paintings because it takes a long time. And maybe you can even address that. Would you consider yourself slow as an artist, painting wise?
I think, my goal right now is to be the best painter I can be.
Yeah.
And so I find the best paintings of mine. I have a very high edit level.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that doesn't leave the studio. The studio I'm in right now, we built 2 years ago. So that's been a major change for me, is actually being able to paint larger, which is something I always wanted to do, but couldn't do because I was functioning in the basement utility area. So a 30 by 40 was about as big as I could go without moving it around onto a secondary easel so I could get decent light on it. So I feel very fortunate. We purchased the empty lots next door to the house a few years ago and built a studio. It had to be built as a house to follow town land use code. So it's a house with a very, very small bathroom, small bedroom, which is my office, small kitchen that just has a kettle and a sink in it, nothing else, and then a large living room with high northern lights, and I love it. It's enabled me to have 2 workstations, so I can work on multiple pieces at a time, which I couldn't do before. I had to focus on a single piece and either finish it or trash it. And so now I think that ability to have 2 or 3 on the go and to be able to work larger, which is what I haven't been able to do. But I'm just interested in being the best painter I can be. And I was enthralled with an interview the other day with Rose Franson, the figurative portrait painter, because she is also a version 2 addict. So if she finishes a piece, and I'm the same way, if I finish a piece, it's almost like the version 1 can be the roadmap. You've figured it all out. And then I am an optimist by nature, so I will wake up the next morning and think, oh, now I have the roadmap. Now I've figured out the secrets, and I think I can do it even better, right? Because you figured out this roadmap, and then it becomes about paint application and surface quality. So if I feel I can do it better, I'm going to start version 2 and do it better, So that has become part of my process too.
Yeah. So what happens to version 1? Does it make it out of the studio?
No.
Does it get scraped?
I only want to let my best pieces out, so it gets sanded down and reused if it's on the panel.
Okay, yeah. So I'm right then. You are a slow painter.
Probably so. I feel like my productivity is going up now that we've got the studio building work done and out the way. It feels like my time is beginning to open up for sure.
Yeah, well, I would just, it sounds like you're, and I don't put this in a derogatory statement, but you're a perfectionist on your paintings.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah,
And I work hard. I show up for very long hours in the studio.
yeah,
And I think my best paintings are ideas, like actually both this, the New Day source material, and this probably ideas and material and paint sessions and observations that started 4 years ago. I think the best things that I produce are ones that have been marinating for quite a while, you know, at the back of my brain. And then I go back and revisit.
yeah. I believe that. I do.
Yeah.
And I see that in your paintings, actually. I mean, I see that there's a lot of thought into a painting. People
Yeah.
might say, "Oh, how would you know that?" And I would say, "I can tell." I said,
Right.
I had somebody in the other day, just a couple of days ago, and I was talking about this painting being done. They brought it in to sell it, and I said, they were in a very dark place when they made that painting. And they're like, well, how could you know? And I go, how could you not know? Look at the
Right.
emotion, look at the colors that they've chosen and the way they've set the composition up. It's just very, they were in a dark place. And those things do show in paintings, I think.
Right. I hope mine are joyous paintings, and I hope they convey, you know, my enthusiasm and excitement, you know, of those places. I do spend a lot of time prepping a piece. I get very nervous when I see people claiming they produced a 30 by 40 in one day. I'm just like, well, how can you do that? And
Yeah.
generally speaking, you can tell because they haven't been thought out. The design could have been better. And I think that's why I was thrilled when you did the Dixon theme show, because to me, it wasn't about emulating or following the places that Dixon painted. It was about absolutely embracing his design and compositional skills. And that, to me, just,
Yeah,
I
it was
mean,
the
I just got
ethos.
so excited by that I actually got to think those pieces through and plan them out intricately in terms of where those big shapes and angles were going to be placed.
Yes, and they held their own against Maynard Dixon. I will tell you that as well.
Thank you.
It's true. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the idea, is those individuals that had followed, who understood Dixon's ethos, were to do their own thing. Now, I don't want, you can interpret it however you want. You could do something that's, Josh Elliott did something where he went to that same place,
Hmm.
exact same place,
Right.
and then redid it how he saw it in today's world, which was very interesting.
Yeah.
But that was, there were no rules, right?
No, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. And I think as you mature as an artist, you realize, you know, when you pick out the exceptional landscape painters, you know, none of this is kind of spontaneous paint flinging going on. They're all deeply, deeply considered, analyzed, planned out. They might look spontaneous in the final result, but they're not, you know, so.
Is it hard to let them go?
I'm pretty much done with them. I'm ready. I'm always ready for the next adventure. So yeah, if I feel like, if I let them go and I feel like I've given it my very, very best shot, you know, you kind of want to be on your knees at that point, and not to feel like, you know, tomorrow's another day, I could do it better. I don't like feeling that. So yeah, sorry, the production rate is slow, but the quality.
Yeah,
Good.
that's good. I don't care about production. I care about quality. I care about doing the best you can. And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
that way with all my artists. And I think they'll tell you that even.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like it kind of in a weird way when somebody is not particularly a fast painter.
Right.
Because
Yeah. I mean, if I showed up at your door with 30 new paintings in the last month, I would be deeply suspicious. Are you sure you can't do these any better?
Very interesting. Yes, I think I'm unique in that way, maybe as a dealer, that I would rather have the biggest and the best and the most complicated pieces that you can do versus
Right.
just give me everything you can,
Right.
And I
And
never,
I think since I've scaled up in size, to me, that's even more important. You know, I mean, you can get away with a lot of slapdash stuff on a 12 by 16, but as soon as you start scaling up, you better pay attention to composition, design, color harmony, like every requirement
Mm.
is kind of exacerbated. I mean, you just have to pay it more attention for sure.
And you're putting all that time and energy. I mean, just as a piece, it's taking you so much time to do. I mean, you don't want to screw it up, right?
Right, right.
So what would you tell a young artist, kind of as we wrap this thing up, who's thinking about going into the art world? I mean, you know, teachers affected you all the way along. They made you who you are. Do you have any kind of words to those individuals that might be going, I want to be an artist?
Well, and I talk, you know, I teach and I love teaching. And so, you know, I do see, you know, 20 somethings that want to dedicate their lives. And I think there's a lot of talk these days about marketing and branding. And I have never paid it much attention. I think you can get really pigeonholed very, very quickly. And so, yeah, it's a kind of cliche, but paint what you love and know what you love and learn to know it as deeply and as broadly as you can in order to paint it well. I keep quoting John Ruskin, and I don't feel much affinity or affection to him, but he had this great quote saying, quality is never an accident. It is always the result of intelligent effort. So I think when I meet artists that maybe want to fast track to the selling and the success and how many fans they have on social media, you know, learn to draw, learn to mix with a primary color palette. There's going to be a point where that lack of academic education is going to catch up with you. And it's really important. You know, those fundamentals have been fundamentals for centuries for a reason. And it's going to count at some point. Yeah.
And I think that's right on the money. And if you do all those components, you'll find dealers like myself who go, oh, now there's an original voice. No
Right.
one's doing that. And I
Right.
can see it in every painting that she or he does. And, you know, that's what I'm always looking for. I'm looking for someone, you know, clearly they have to have the chops. That's kind of a given, but they have to have something else. They have to have a voice of uniqueness. And it doesn't mean that it's unique in the, oh, I'm doing these designs or whatever. It can be the way you approach the land, in your case, landscapes, and how your sensibilities, and you see it every time.
Right. And
And
that comes from authenticity.
that's right.
I think I hear this a lot, you know, finding your own voice. And I was interviewed recently and I said, well, the voice comes from, you know, once you get into these fundamentals of learning how to draw or even choosing what to paint, what subject matter to paint, and then how to compose it, what you're dealing with is a multitude, a full spectrum of choices that have to be made along the way. And it's which choice you make that will identify who you are. And I think people get it into their head that, who am I? What do I want to be marketed as, you know? And it's just a no. Paint what you love, but really, really get to know your subject matter. And then be aware of your choices that you can make. I know that as I was a kid looking at art magazines and you'd see those process shots, you know, here's how I started the painting and it goes through, you know, step 1 to 12. I know I always responded to kind of right around step 7. And then I'd think, oh, they overworked it, you know, so that's my sensibility, you know, be aware of what you respond to.
Yes, and you will see that I call it throwing everything but the kitchen sink. You know,
Right.
they put the rainbow, they've got the birds going over, you know, they've got the little figure. I mean, it's like you should have stopped with, you know, with none of it. Like, you should have stopped
Well,
with the canyon.
when I teach, I talk about having a singular motif. You know, even if you're dealing with this, you know, big vista scene, don't treat each element with equal weight. You know, have a singular idea that I really wanted this to be about the light and shadow pattern, or I really wanted this to be about the shape of a particular tree. And then, you know, you have to stay focused on that motif. and not deal with everything with equal weight, equal attention, equal detail. Because that gets really hard to look at, you know, it gets really busy. It's a lot of things competing for your attention.
And so when your eye goes to that painting, does it immediately go to that motif for you as an artist? You've done it.
Yeah, I think, and it's different to focal point. For me, motif is the intention, it's the motivation behind a painting. You should get, I think it's the way into accessing what the artist was feeling when they painted that. So it's not necessarily focal point. It's the intent behind the painting.
And does the title come from that?
Singular thing that they wanted to capture. I'm sorry?
And does the title come from that same component of the painting?
Oh, it should, shouldn't it? You know, I struggle with titles. Either they come to me and they feel like they belong, or if they don't, then I just go for fact. And that is just as good, I think. You know, you don't want to try and be too clever with it.
No, it's funny, when I write my murder mysteries, the title always comes first. I mean, it just comes.
Oh, interesting.
I can't explain it, but it's like within, you know, a few minutes. It's like,
okay,
I know the title, I know the sense of the book.
Yeah.
And I don't usually, I only changed it once, and that's because a very well-known author says, no one will know what that means, and they'll have a problem selling. And they're probably right. I think they were right. I mean, this guy.
It is true. So I have given things titles which I thought were very clever and very appropriate, and it's totally alienated my audience. I had one that I did in far west Texas in a town called Valentine, and it was very much what I touched on earlier about trying to figure out what Texas was to me, and plowing my way through the myth of Texas with what real Texas felt like. And it was of this building in far west Texas, and I called it From Myth to Reality, because the building actually looked like what I perceived should an old Western building look like, you know, adobe, lime washed. And I went up to it, and it was actually built with chicken wire and 2x4s, and it wasn't what it was meant to be at all, right? It was just, it was trying to live up to this myth, and it wasn't that. So I titled it that painting, Mark, and it didn't sell, and it didn't sell. So then I changed the title, The Road to Valentine, Texas, and it sold within a week. So you can alienate your audience.
That's true. Dixon did that with a painting of his, 1935. He called it The Bank Winds, and it was an abandoned homestead that was in Carson City area, and it didn't sell. And he called it The Bank Winds because he had a lot of animosity what was going on in this world and the country at that time, and a lot to bankers. Ultimately, he washed it out. He changed it. You can still see it barely underneath, but it's called, and then he called it Abandoned Homestead. And then he was able to place the painting. And ultimately, when I placed the painting, which is rather ironic, I sold it to a banker.
Okay, right. Yeah.
But I didn't tell him about the backstory until after he owned the painting.
It's funny, New Day, when I was doing that, I was going to call it The Way Through, because it's just where I live. It's my morning walk with my dogs. And we have this very, very dense grove of very young aspens. Okay. But the snow in the river valley floor, and then in the rolling hills beyond leading up Silver Creek Valley, there's, you know, just in that low morning light, the snow banks were, you know, showing these shapes, which I felt, you know, it showed you the way through what could be a very scary, dense forest, you know. And so I was going to call it The Way Through. And then, you know, the pandemic started unraveling, and it was a painting I had started just as that was beginning to happen. And I just felt you know, optimistic that we're going to get through this and we're going to be better, and it's going to be a new day. And so that's where that came from. Oh,
that's a wonderful story. That is. And when I placed the painting, sorry again, Mom, I'm going to make sure I share that component of the story. In fact, for those who watch this on YouTube, we'll make sure that it goes into the YouTube version so they can see the painting that,
Great, great.
that we're talking about. Well, Jill, thank you so much. It's been
Thank you.
fantastic to talk to you.
Great to see you.
Yeah, we've been trying to get you down here, and now it's like, why? I don't have to. I'll just see Jill anytime I want
Well,
on
I was
Zoom.
planning on coming down in March, and then
I
this
know.
unraveled, so here we are, you know.
Yeah. Well, keep doing what you do, which is painting. I'm sure you will. Stephen Dat sent me a picture the other day of what painters do, and it showed, a painter going through all the different isolation times, and it was just basically the same artist in front of a painting. It didn't really matter what happened in the world; they were just still doing their job.
Right, right.
Which is
It's
fantastic.
interesting. I've definitely switched to bigger pieces. When this started unraveling, I thought, oh, this is a great time to experiment and learn new things. And then I realized that that wasn't actually what I needed to do. What I needed to do was get larger, long-term projects showing my very best skills and kind of have a long-term relationship rather than a bunch of one-night stands. Like, this is the time to invest in some major pieces. And I think it helped, keep me on track mentally, was that I had a friend to keep coming back to rather than feeling like, finding the motivation on a daily basis to come up with something new. It's been a really valuable time to just be deeply invested in a few major pieces.
People can, if you take these opportunities, and then, it's a crisis, it's a horrible thing that's going on, but there can be some linings, some golden linings that come out of these kind of things. And I think that's exactly what you just said is,
Right. And I've started camping again. My escape used to be to go off and teach or to go on painting trips. And now you just grab a tent and go into the forest and wake up in a different place. And that's pretty special, learning my own territory in different times of days. It's been fun.
Well, you'll get to know the environment even better, and it'll make your paintings better, right?
Right. Yeah.
You just get those little nuances of light and color that you can't get unless you wake up at 5:30 in the morning and see the light.
Exactly.
Smell and all that. Yeah. You're talented. I'm so pleased you're part of my gallery.
I'm thrilled to be there.
Yeah, it's just wonderful to have such a talented artist. And I can't wait to see that painting that we can see in the back and hanging with the, how are you going to frame that, by the way? So that just to let people know, it's a double image of.
Yeah, so it's a diptych. So it's two 30 by 30s. And I was initially trying to work out this material, the subject matter, on a singular canvas. And I've been exploring dynamic symmetry quite a lot. So I started off with a root 4 rectangle. I learned a lot from Dixon. So, and what I realized was that the painting on a singular format wanted to be about too much, right? And it goes back to what I was saying about having a singular motif. And so the bend in the river, the big red bluff in the foreground, and then the quality of the light, they were all competing as a motif. And so I actually stopped and I thought, I've got to think this thing through because it's not going to work on the singular format. So why do I want to have that broader vista? And so what I wanted to capture is when we're in such a grand scale place like that, how do we view it? And how we view it is we look here and then something else captures us and something else captures us. So I actually, as soon as I thought, well, what I'm wanting to capture is two glimpses from the one viewpoint. Then I thought, well, I'm working on a root 4 rectangle, which is made up of 2 squares, right? That's what a root 4 is. And suddenly it was like that aha moment. And as soon as I split that visual material, and then within each square played off with dynamic symmetry in terms of placing where the mesa points are and some of the darker accents in the foreground, it just totally, that's where the time comes in, Mark. It's just working away on a singular canvas and then having the patience to kind of throw that out and start again and say, and refine the idea, resolve the idea, and say, oh, you know, this is it. It was an aha moment. As soon as I split it up into 2 glimpses, it makes sense to me. They don't compete. So I'm actually going to frame them separately.
I thought
They're
you
going to
must.
be,
I figured that's how it was going to be.
yeah, they're going to be framed separately, 3/4 inch, 12 karat gold with a yellow ochre bowl. So it's going to be really soft because it's about the silvery light. There's so many of those highlights are cool and silvery.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I want to go with the frame.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, we should note the fact that artists, really great artists, take the time to think about the framing and how it's going to be and the colors of the frame and the carving and all that. It's not just, oh, we're going to slap a frame on it. No, you probably have thought about that from day one, haven't you, to some extent?
Sure, yeah, and at one point I was thinking of a singular frame, but with a vertical through the middle, like a square figure of 8 on its side, you know? And I just think that it felt too gimmicky. I can't stand diptychs or triptychs when they're just the gimmick rather than there actually being a good reason for them to be split like that. There has to be a good reason. And the weight of it was somewhat concerning me too, because these are cradled panels, so they're quite heavy.
Mm.
But I kind of spaced it out as that would be. I ripped some pieces of wood, different widths, so I can get a sense of the frame. And it still didn't recreate that sense of 2 glimpses. And as soon as I pull them apart, maybe 2-3 inches apart from each other, to me it's so visually exciting, you know. So they definitely need to be framed separately, but hung maybe 2.5 inches from each other, somewhere in there.
So that's going to be really exciting the day you get they're framed and you get to hang them on
Right.
the wall for
And
the very first time.
I always leave my last paint session, my last pass over the whole thing, which is normally 2 to 3 days worth of adjustments, you know, a lot of thinking and small adjustments. I always leave that until the frame's here, you know.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. And you put them in the frames and make the adjustments?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
very interesting. I didn't know that.
Without trying to get paint on the frame. Be really careful.
I'm going to look and see if you do this next time. Yes, you definitely are a slow painter. Yes, you're a perfectionist.
I'm a thoughtful painter. I tell you what, I actually paint very fast when I get going.
Yeah, no,
But
you
I'm
know,
a
it's actually not, you're not slow. That's not even the right word. I mean, it's you're a perfectionist. You want to get it as humanly possible for you, as good as it possibly can be. The
Right.
time you put into these things may be way more than most artists even. It's just that the amount you produce is a smaller amount, which again, I think is a wonderful thing as a dealer. I will tell you this, because every one of those paintings has an increased value in my mind, because you can only do so many. I mean, if we look at this painting, which is a 30 by 30 times 2, how many of those can you do in a lifetime? 30, maybe 20,
Right.
more likely. So there might be 20 possibilities total in your entire life, and that's probably even pushing it. So, you know, if somebody gets one of those paintings like that, you know, it's a rare thing right off the bat. It's
Right. There's no doubt that, you know, at this point, one, I'm trying to be the best painter I can be, but 2, every piece I put out there, you know, I want to feel like it's a museum quality piece. I just don't want it to be wall decoration, you know.
Yeah.
If I go tomorrow, I want that to represent me for sure.
Yeah. And I think that comes too from the knowledge of what you did as working in the gallery, the portrait gallery. I mean, you saw hundreds of years of other artists toil, and you were toiling to find out who those artists were even.
Right.
And, you know, you want to be remembered. And I understand that, you know, I put a tag on all the backs of my paintings too. So 200 years from now, I want somebody to go, oh, that's what that was, a Medicine Man gallery tag.
Yeah, right.
He had really good artists. Yeah, no schlock there. They were all very good artists.
No, it counts. It really, provenance is everything on those
Yeah,
historic
no.
pieces.
I thought about that from day one,
Yeah,
that I'm thinking 200 years in advance of
right.
what I'm leaving to the art community and to those paintings. So, because I think it will have some kind of merit. It'll
Quality
outlast me.
matters. Quality will survive everything else.
Yeah. Well, you clearly have quality in all forms and fashion, not only from your paintings, but now I know as a human being, you have that as well, which is wonderful to hear. The backstory was wonderful, and thank you for taking the time and doing this. And until we see each other again, which I don't know when,
Right,
it'll
right.
happen.
Yeah, for sure. Come to Rica, visit.
Yeah,
It's not hard to socially distance in Rica.
I might. You might be surprised. We'll talk after the camera.
Okay.
All right, very good.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much. Keep going. I can hardly wait to see the final results. And just go ahead, tell your mom it's never going to be.
It's not going to happen. Okay.
Never. Guaranteed.
Uh,
You know
says it.
why? You know why I know that, Jill? You know why I know that?
No.
Because I'll buy it and put it in my own home. I like it so.
Oh,
Oh,
that would be
I
great.
love that painting. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Mom. All right, very good. We'll talk
Thank you.
soon. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.